All right, so we're looking at Daniel 11, part 1. Now, we're probably going to have maybe about 5 or 6 parts. Daniel 11 is a very complex chapter. Lots and lots of more information. And we're going to see here that as we look at Daniel chapter 11, we're going to have a time frame. When Daniel wrote it, we're going to discover it's the same time that he received the vision of Daniel chapter 8. And so we're going to see repeat and enlarge, repeat and enlarge. So much more information. We find that the angel Gabriel revisits Daniel to give him an explanation of the 2300-day prophecy, which we studied in chapter 9. And then, of course, more information in chapter 10 about the Chazon, the greater period of the vision from the time of the Medes and the Persians right up until the end of the 2300 days or literal years. So in this Bible study, we're going to unpack how both visions of Daniel 8, which is the Mare and the Chazon. So the Mare referred specifically to the 2300 days, and the 70 weeks was that which helped Daniel to understand and helps us to understand the greater part of the Mare. And so these chapters, Daniel chapter 11 and Daniel chapter 8, are related and provide a framework to the passages to understand in all of the Bible. So although Daniel 11 is considered to be one of the most difficult passages to understand in all the Bible, this lesson, as we continue, of course, will guide us through a verse-by-verse explanation of Daniel chapter 11. So, and we're also going to discover who are the kings of the north, who is the king of the south, and we're going to see that there's different phases to the king of the north and the king of the south. Many people ask me the question, who is the king of the north in Daniel chapter 11? We're going to unpack that very, very clearly from God's word. So, God wants his people to be encouraged and firmly planted in these prophecies so that they will be ready. The whole purpose to study the book of Daniel and Revelation is to be ready for the coming of Jesus. And the prophecies are all about Jesus. And so we're going to once again witness the rise and fall of world empires in Daniel chapter 11. And we're going to see how they come to fulfillment with the second coming of Christ. Isn't that beautiful? When we get to the end, of course, Daniel chapter 12, we come to that. So we looked at this here, Daniel 8 verse 14, for 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. We studied about the sanctuary. We understood what this greater Chazon, or the whole prophecy, was all about. But we found that in here, of course, the 2,300 days is the Mare. And so we want to have a close inspection of Daniel 8 and 9, rather Daniel 8 and 11, and see how these chapters fit. It's absolutely incredible. We remembered now in 2 Peter 1 verse 19, we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to heed as a light that shines in a dark place. And so prophecy gives us the light of God's word to understand where we are. You know, it's terrible to walk where the lights go off and you don't have any light to see, and you're trying to walk to find your torch or your switch for something else, and you stumble and you fall and hurt yourself. Well, without prophecy, we won't be able to understand who is the light. And this light, of course, that shines in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rise in your heart. And we've discovered this. And the morning star, of course, is Jesus Christ, according to Revelation chapter 22. He is the bright and morning star. And so we're going to see in all these prophecies how Christ is leading his church, his people, to prepare for his soon return. How he came the first time, and of course, how he came the second time. Now, many people missed his first coming. And there were just few people that welcomed the birth of the Messiah. It was just a few humble shepherds on the outskirts of the town of Bethlehem, and the wise men that came from the east. And they were not even, these were Gentiles. They weren't even of the Hebrew nation, but they followed the prophecies. Many scholars believe those wise men that came from the east, they came to Bethlehem because they studied the prophecies of Daniel. They saw that something was about to happen. Messiah was soon to be born. Messiah was soon to minister. Messiah was soon to be crucified, lifted up for the world. And so they came to Bethlehem all the way from Mesopotamia and from the Euphrates. And they came over and they found, of course, the Messiah who was born. And so let's be amongst those who will be ready when Jesus comes the second time and not be lost because we failed to understand prophecy. Now, again, I just want to look at this chart here. Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8. We studied the links. All these chapters are linked. Daniel 2 by 4 metals and Daniel 7 by 4 beasts. And we find, of course, we have more information. Daniel chapter 7 from Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 8 is a little bit different because it starts in the time of the Medes and the Persians as opposed to Babylon in chapter 2 and chapter 7. But we understood the reason why God gave Daniel the vision of Daniel chapter 8 is because God, even though Daniel was living in the time when Babylon was still ruling, it was still another 11 years at least before Babylon fell. But the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 is about the main focus is about the 2300 evenings and mornings, the Mare. And we understood the Mare by Gabriel giving Daniel the 70 weeks or 490 days, which takes us to the Messiah and his ministry, his death, and of course his resurrection and high priestly ascension. And so we found out that in Daniel 7, we've got a heavenly court scene, which is not in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2 ends the coming of the stone kingdom that fills the whole earth. So does Daniel 7. But before God comes, or the Son of Man comes in Daniel chapter 7, there's a heavenly judgment. Well, Daniel 8 actually focuses on that heavenly judgment, which is, of course, at the end of the 2300 evenings and mornings. And then, of course, Jesus can come. The Son of Man can come. Daniel chapter 8 ends only at the end of the 2300 evenings and mornings. So it was about primarily the Mare, the 2300 evening and morning, the 2300 days, which is 2300 literal years from, of course, the going forth of the decree, which was given in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, to build and restore Jerusalem. And that decree we discovered was given by King Artaxerxes Longimanus in the year 457 BC. And so the 2300 years ended in the year 1844. We understood that's when the judgment began. So here is that long time prophecy. It's the longest time prophecy in all of Scripture. And again, it's all about Jesus. But before the 2300 evenings and mornings come to an end, in 1844, Daniel was told in chapter 7 that there's going to be a little horn that would war against God's people and would seek to change times and laws. This little horn would rule for time, the dividing of time, which we discovered is 1,260 years. And of course, in Daniel chapter 8, the little horn is mentioned again because he wants to take the sanctuary and cast it down to the ground and to trample upon it and to again overcome God's people. And he wars against them. But of course, we discovered that prophecy came to an end in 1798. And so we find then in 1844, we discovered that God was going to restore the heavenly sanctuary, the holy place, or the most holy place, rather, I should say, because when Jesus entered into the heavenly sanctuary after his ascension, it was where he began his ministry in the holy place. So here's the chart that shows literal Israel and spiritual Israel. Of course, spiritual Israel is the Christian church today. For Daniel, his people, the 490 years were for literal Israel. Remember, God told him in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24, that unto Messiah and the coming of the Messiah, that prophecy was for Daniel and his people and for the holy city. And so we see Jesus came on time the first time. And of course, now we are living in the time when Jesus is going to come again, the second time. But before Jesus comes, at the end of the 2300 days, is when Jesus began his heavenly judgment. And that court session has been convened since 1844. The Bible doesn't tell us when the judgment ends, but the Bible does tell us when the judgment is over, the plagues fall upon those of the mark of the beast, and soon Jesus comes to deliver his people. At the end of Daniel chapter 12, there is, of course, Michael who stands up to deliver his people. I hope you've been blessed by the study guides and that you've been able to fill them out the best of your ability. Of course, the answers come through every Monday. Thank you for Chantel, who puts that up for us. Now, let's go into Daniel chapter 11, verse 1. So it says here, also I, in the first year of Darius, some people say Darius, that's fine. In the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. Now, this verse actually belongs to Daniel chapter 10. Remember, Gabriel had come after Daniel had a theophany, met Jesus Christ, the glorified pre-incarnate Christ, the Son of Man, who is called Michael in the book of Daniel and also the book of Revelation. Well, he could not be able to bear the glory and majesty and power of Michael, and so he fell to his face trembling. And of course, Gabriel comes to ask him to get up and says, listen, I've come to give you more information about the Chazon and also about the Mari, because we find there's more information coming through for us. But primarily we find that there's a lot more about the Chazon, which is the greater prophecy, which includes the rise and fall of the nations. But we find in Daniel 11 verse 1, it's in the first year of Darius. So clearly we can see a link between Daniel chapter 11 and Daniel chapter 8, because look at Daniel chapter 9 at the end. Sorry, I meant to say Daniel chapter 9. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ashurus of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. So Daniel 9 verses 1 and Daniel chapter 11 verses 1 onwards is given to Daniel in the first year of Darius. And of course, that is in the year 538 BC. 2 years later, 536 BC, Cyrus would give the decree for God's people, that is Daniel's people, to go back and to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So here is the time setting. So as this chapter 11 goes on, it says here, and now. So in other words, if you look at Daniel 11 verse 1, when the angel Gabriel told Daniel that he had come to give him further explanation and expansion on Daniel chapter 8 and 9, he said that from the time that Daniel had started praying, remember Daniel was praying for 21 days, 3 weeks. He was fasting and praying. We see him praying in Daniel chapter 2 for God to give him the vision about the king's dream, Nebuchadnezzar. We see, of course, him praying in Daniel chapter 6 when he's thrown the lion's den. Well, just before he was thrown the lion's den. And then he prayed, of course, we find him praying again in Daniel chapter 9. He was praying. And in Daniel chapter 10, we find again he is fasting and praying this time. And so here is the issue here. Daniel was concerned that the time of the 70 weeks was about the 70 years, I should say, sorry, of the prophecy of Jeremiah, chapter 25, and Jeremiah 29, verses 10, where for 70 literal years, the children of Israel, the children of Judah would be in captivity in Babylon. So he knew that this time period was almost coming to an end. And so we find him praying and praying. And of course, he's also praying there for God to move upon God's people to go back and to build, restore, and build Jerusalem. So this is the time setting. And we see that this is very, very important to understand that he's praying and asking for God to guide and lead these people. Now look at verses 2, Daniel 11 verse 2. So Gabriel told Daniel that when he started praying, that the king of the prince of the king of Persia had come. We understood that is to be Satan, and come to resist on the minds of Cyrus, the kings of Persia. So remember, Cyrus was the ruling king of Persia, and Darius was his uncle, which of course Cyrus had put in charge in Babylon. But the Persians were the most stronger of the two nations that came against Babylon. And we see then that Cyrus did give a decree 2 years later when Daniel had been praying in Daniel chapter 9 verse 1 and here in Daniel chapter 11 verse 1. But Daniel realized the 70 weeks also in Daniel chapter 9 he needed more information. So he's praying for God to bring him understanding. And so we see then, it goes on to say here in verse 2, which really should be the starting of chapter 11. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. Now, of course, the first king of Persia was Cyrus. So 3 kings come after the kingdom of Persia. So remember, the vision of Daniel chapter 8 began, although it began in the kingdom of Babylon, was just coming to an end, the vision itself began in the time of the Medes and the Persians. Of course, in Daniel chapter 9, verse 1, same time period. So here is the thing. Daniel is given more information now. So same period of time, but more information. He's told by Gabriel, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. So a 4th one will come. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So remember, in Daniel chapter 8, we had the 2-horned beast, right? The ram. And the 2 horns, Daniel was told, are the kings of Media and Persia. And then after that came this he-goat, and he had 1 notable horn, which Daniel was told is the first king of Greece. And it came and took down the 2-horned beast of course, the ram, which represents the Medes and Persians. And so the kingdom of Greece took over, which of course is the bronze in Daniel chapter 2, and is the leopard in Daniel chapter 7. So you can see the links between these chapters. So here's the thing. Daniel seeing these kingdoms come again, but more information, because 3 kings will arise, and there's going to be a 4th one. Now, who were these 3 kings? Well, very, very clearly. The first one was Cambyses, and any good historian will tell you that, good history book. You can look at the Britannica encyclopedia. It'll tell you who these kings were. So you've got Cambyses, then you've got Darius Hystaspes. Now, Darius Hystaspes is not to be confused with Darius the Mede, right? This was Darius, a Persian king. Remember, he was told 3 more kings will arise from Persia. So this is Darius Hystaspes is called as well. And then after him comes Xerxes. Now, Xerxes is known in the book of Esther as King Ahasuerus. That was the name in the book of Esther. And so Xerxes, after him comes the 4th one is King Artaxerxes. So here's something very interesting. King Artaxerxes is the 4th one, and he's the one that gave, remember, the decree for the re-establishment of Israel as a nation to rule, to set up its own laws and courts and magistrates, and of course the completion of the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem, its walls, its worship system, the temple, everything was intact only in the 4th king of Persia, Artaxerxes, and he gave the decree in the year, of course, 457 BC. So why 4 kings? Why is the prophet started with the 4th one and not with the others? Why? Because already Artaxerxes has been pointed out as we study in the book, of course, of Daniel chapter 8. And the explanation, Daniel chapter 9 of Daniel chapter 8, he is the one who gave the decree for the Jews to be established. So this is the same setting of Daniel 9 at the opening of Daniel chapter 11. So it indicates that the days, since both prophets start at the decree of Artaxerxes, the days of the 70 weeks or 490 days, and the 2,300 days is the same period. So don't worry about that too much. I'm giving you some dates there so you can look at them on your own. You don't have to memorize these dates. You don't need to know them. But we can go back in history and see that, yes, just as God said it would be, this is exactly how it came to be. So King Cyrus issues the decree in the year, that's in 536 BC, for the Jews to go back. But of course, it is King Artaxerxes Longimanus who gives that decree for the beginning of the 70 weeks and the 2,300 days, because they start together. And so Daniel was told that the 70 weeks are cut off from the 2,300. So we know the 2,300 days, which are literal years, start at the same period. 457 BC is when Artaxerxes gave. So you can see, this is from Ptolemy's canon, that Cyrus was the first king of Persia. Then you got Cambyses, Darius, and then Xerxes the first, and then Artaxerxes. And so let's go on here. It says here in Daniel 11 verses 3, then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. So here's something very interesting. So chapter 11 verse 2 tells us that this fourth king who would stir up against the realm of Greece would of course take over. That's the goat with the notable horn in Daniel chapter 8. So we know that happened when, of course, exactly as God said it would be. But the point is, here is Daniel saying something here in verse 3. Then a mighty king shall arise. We've now switched now from the Persians in verses 2 and verses 3. We move to Alexander the Great now. Here is something very important to understand. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. So who's this mighty king? This is the notable horn that was able to rush at the two-horned beast of the ram and crush it. It says he came against him with choler, which means in anger, and takes the Medes and the Persian kingdom down. So the resulting battle between Alexander the Great, he first conquers King Xerxes, and then afterwards, of course, Artaxerxes himself. But we find here that the second battle that Alexander fought was also a really heated battle. It was in Arbela in the year 331 BC. And after he captured Babylon and went as far as India. I've been to a place in Italy, in Napoli, where the original painting of the Battle of Arbela between the Alexander the Great and the mighty kingdom of the Persians. And the Persians were taken down. They had a much larger army. They had an army of about 600,000 men. Alexander only had an army of 40,000. He was way outnumbered. But because of his skill and strategy and courage, and many historians say it's like God was on his side. God allowed him with such a small army to take down this mighty Persian army. And so we find that his kingdom, of course, extended far and beyond all the others, right up to India. And so he would do according to his will. And this is what it says here. And when he has arisen, speaking of Alexander the Great, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven. Now we saw this here in, remember, Daniel chapter 8, that after that notable horn, four other horns would rise in their place. We understood that to be the four generals. Remember them? Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. These were the four generals of Alexander. But when it says the four winds, so this is different compass positions. We're going to look at it just now. I'm going to show you how Alexander's kingdom was divided on the map. So this is the thing. When Alexander's kingdom came to an end, he was only 33 years old. He only ruled for about 12 years. That's about it. And he died with no successor. So it says here, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. In other words, his kingdom was divided to four winds, the four generals, but not to his posterity. Well, he had a young son, he had a brother, but these people were all killed within 15 years after Alexander died. And of course, the four generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, and of course, Seleucus and Ptolemy, they basically divided Alexander's kingdom amongst the four of them. But later on, we find the two main contending generals was Seleucus and Ptolemy. They absorbed the kingdoms later on of Cassander and Lysimachus. So everything north of Palestine was ruled by Ptolemy. That's right down to Egypt. And everything that's south of Palestine, and everything north of Palestine was ruled by Seleucus. And so we find this is what took place. So it goes on to say, but not among his posterity. Look how so clear and particular the Bible is. So much more details now we're getting in. Nor according to his dominion, with which he ruled. So in other words, Alexander had no successor. His posterity was not able to rule after him. It went to the four generals. for his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others beside these. The others beside these is his posterity. So the 4 generals are the ones that came to rule. And that struggle continued for 22 years after Alexander's death. So it didn't just happen like that. And so there was great struggle. So here's a chart I'd like you to look at. I want you to see the connection now between Daniel 11 and Daniel 8, 7, and 2. You can see again the Medes and the Persians, right? Which corresponds to the silver, the bear, and of course the 2-horned ram in Daniel chapter 8. And we've just looked here in Daniel chapter 4, where we've seen this great king, Alexander, Greece, and with the 4 points of the winds or the compass represented by this time, not 4 horns, but 4 points or 4 winds, which represent the 4 generals. So very clearly you can see how that correlates there, right? And we're going to finish up in with the next kingdom just now, tonight, and then we'll continue from there. But I want you to see in this chart here how very clearly it begins with the Mede. Darius was ruling, and then of course with the kings of Persia, and then comes to Greece, and then of course after Greece, after Alexander, the king of Greece, is the 4 generals. So this is where we are right now. So Alexander is called Alexander the Great because he did great things at such a young age. He was able to conquer. At just the age of 20, he began his conquest to take over the world. And of course, at the age of 33, he was like nowhere else to conquer. And he died in the city of Babylon. He was intrigued with the city of Babylon, but he died there because of an overdose of alcohol. And so he only rules for 12 years. So in his prime, he's gone just at the age of 33. Who else can you think died in their prime? Jesus Christ died at the age of 33. He was crucified on the cross, and Daniel tells us about that. So he was a great conqueror, and he amassed the largest empire in the entire ancient world that covered more than 3,000 miles. And he did this without any modern technology. No guns and no planes and no bombs, just on horseback and with foot soldiers. And so even their communication was very crude, but he was an amazing guy. So here's a map of the ancient Near East during the time when Babylon reigned, and then you can see the Persian Empire after that. And then you can see here, this red belt here is actually called the Fertile Crescent, because here is all desert. So whenever the armies came, even though Babylon was actually east of Jerusalem, whenever they came, they had to come through this Fertile Crescent where armies could be able to march and feed themselves, where it wasn't too hot, and then they would attack from the north because this is north. And so, of course, Egypt is south of Jerusalem. And so as you look at this map here, you can see the divisions of Alexander's kingdom. So you've got the Seleucid kingdom, which became the kingdom of the north, because it was north of Jerusalem. This thin strap here is Jerusalem, and they ruled Jerusalem most of the time. There was a short time when the Ptolemaic kingdom, that's the king of the south, ruled Jerusalem, because there were these Syrian wars, as they called. The battles between the Seleucid kingdom, the kingdom of the north, and the Ptolemaic kingdom, the kingdom of the south. And then, of course, Cassander and Lysimachus, these 2 kingdoms were absorbed, I should say, between. So here I'm just giving you very clearly that you can see Cassander ruled there in Thrace, and Lysimachus more towards where Nineveh would have been. And of course, here is the king of the north, Seleucus, and his posterity that took over from him, and Ptolemy, king of the south. And again, they call king of the north because these 2 nations now, it's really one nation, Greece, but these 2 kings of the same nation, Greece, that were ruling were, like I said, north of Israel or Palestine and south of Israel. So you can understand when it begins talking about the king of the north and the king of the south, it's talking about the Syrian wars. And so here's another map here. You can see the Seleucid kingdom, king of the north, carried this whole area. Thrace and Greece were all absorbed into that kingdom. And Ptolemy, who really ruled from the south down from Jerusalem, and it involved largely Egypt and parts of Africa there. So that's just for you to have an understanding of what it means when it says king of the north and king of the south. Okay, let's carry on. Now, notice what it says here. We're moving now to these two kingdoms. The wars between Cassander, the wars between Cassander and the other one, Lysimachus, were absorbed into the kingdom of the north. So these are the Syrian wars between the king of Seleucids and his posterity and the king of Ptolemy and his posterity. And so you need to understand this. There's a lot of information now. Let's carry on here. It says also, the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So this is around 250 BC. King Ptolemy of Egypt, called the king of the south, and at that time in the north, the king was Antiochus Theos of Syria. He was the king of the north. So what happened now is they tried to guarantee peace among themselves, these two kings, right? And every time they fought, God's people, Israel, were like caught in the middle and used as pawns between these two powers. So what happened is the king of the north attempted, so this is King Antiochus Theos, right? He attempted to guarantee peace between the countries, and so he marries Ptolemy's daughter. Her name was Berenice. This is history. Berenice now, of course, was married to the king of the north. So by this marriage, it was hoped that the two warring powers would end. Now, Antiochus already had a wife. His wife's name was Laodice. And so it was part of the deal that he divorced. So this is the king of the north had to divorce Laodice, and he would marry, of course, Berenice. That's Ptolemy's daughter, the king of the south. So it was part of the deal. So the divorce was arranged and the new marriage was celebrated. And in due course, a baby boy was born to this Berenice and, of course, Antiochus, king of Syria, or the king of the north. And something happened. Unfortunately, Antiochus soon found out that, well, he just got up one morning. Maybe he just like saw Berenice and said, nah, I don't love you anymore. And so he just kept on making comparisons between her and his former wife, Laodice, who he had, of course, divorced. So he decided to make a comeback with his first wife. But when Berenice's father, the king of Egypt, died, it only happened after the father died. So Antiochus now divorces Berenice and he takes back Laodice back. And so it says here, the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes. That was the marriage between the two. And he shall gain power over him and have a dominion, and his dominion will be great. But what happens now when the king remarries his previous wife, Laodice? She became very bitter. She distrusted her husband. And in those days, it was terrible. She organized for him to be poisoned. And she had Berenice and her son to be murdered because she didn't want to have any competition for the throne. And that's exactly what happened. So it says here, at the end of some years, they shall join forces. That was when he remarried Laodice for the king of, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. So that was the divorce that happened. They did get married, but it didn't last too long. And so there was a problem now. What happened was her brothers now, Berenice had been murdered, of course. Her brothers who took over in the king of the south from Ptolemy, they now came against the king of the north, against Antiochus. It says, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So these men, the brothers of Berenice, came up against, of course, the king of the south. Notice here it is in verse 7. But from a branch of her roots, this is Berenice's brothers, That's why it's called branch of her roots. So these were her kindred, her brothers, her family. But from a branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army. So this is the king of the south, the Ptolemaic kingdom, coming against the king of the north, because their sister had been killed, and their nephew, of course, Berenice's son, had been murdered. And so they come against the king of the north and enter the fortress of the king of the north and deal with him and prevail. So they were able to conquer, and they actually go back to the south, to Egypt, with a lot of spoils. They took a lot of gold and silver, some of the idols and gods and goddesses, and they went back with him. They prevailed against the king of the north. And so this is what happened. And thereafter, there were many other battles between the king of the north, the king of the south. These are the literal kingdoms of the Seleucids against, of course, the Ptolemaics. And so notice what it says here. And he shall also carry their gods captive, verse 8, to Egypt. So usually when armies fought in those days, it was a war between gods as well. So whichever was the greater army, their gods were more triumphant. And so they would take the gods of the nations who had lost the war and take them and put them into their temples, showing that they were subject to their gods. The same thing Nebuchadnezzar did, remember, in Daniel chapter 1, when he overcame Jerusalem. He took all the vessels from the Lord's temple and put them in his temple there in Babylon. So this is what happened. And of course, they took captives with them, princes and precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So now the power base has shifted. The king of the south, the Ptolemaics, and they ruled from Egypt. They were now more strong than the king of the north. So Ptolemy, Euergetes, who was the king of the south, he took lots and lots of spoil with him. Historians tell us about 30 million worth of graven images and a whole lot of other stuff. And he takes that to Egypt. Look at verses 9 now. Now, something else happens. Also, the king of the south shall come to the king, also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So there were these wars here backwards and forwards, and it continued for quite some time. But notice here in Daniel 11 verse 10, however, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. So in other words, Seleucus and two sons, their names were Cyrannus and Magnus. Magnus was also known as Antiochus III. They were bent on revenge from coming from the king of the south that had come to revenge on Berenice and took back captive and took back so much of their gods and silver and gold. And so they assemble a great army and they go over to the south in Egypt. And every time they went there, they would pass through Palestine. And Antiochus III actually desecrated the temple in Jerusalem and offered sacrifices of a pig there. And some people think, well, that is, of course, the sanctuary that was desolated, but it's got nothing to do with that, of course. But this is what happened. Every time that war crossed each other, and God's people, Palestine, Egypt, Israel, got caught up with these wars, and they would take lots of stuff from them and use them as pawns. So notice what it says here. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage. So again, another battle in rages. And go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall master a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand of his enemy. So this is Ptolemy Philopator, who raised an army larger than that of Antiochus III, and thus defeated him and also recaptured Palestine. So Palestine kept on changing hands between the king of the north and the king of the south. King of the north, king of the south. You will see this very clearly as we look at the spiritual king of the north and the king of the south towards the end of Daniel chapter 11. But here it's speaking literally of the Syrian wars between the Seleucids and the Ptolemaics. So a peace treaty finally was struck between them. And notice what it says in verse 12. When he was taken away the multitude, when he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So every time they break their peace treaties. And so Ptolemy and Antiochus, these wars continued, and so the problem is wars cost a lot of money, and wars also were terrible things. And what happened with the Ptolemaic kingdom, the subjects rebelled against all these wars, which costed money and lives and so much. And so the result was there was an insurrection, and he even had to revoke his decrees against the Jews because he took opportunity to persecute the Jews, the king of the south, because he felt that they had somehow aided and abetted the wars between the king and the north. And so notice here it says, for the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. And so this verse pictures the second invasion of Antiochus Magnus after 14 years of peace, and the death of the Egyptian ruler Ptolemy Philopator. After he died, Antiochus attacked his son, who was Ptolemy Epiphanes, but he came to rule when he was only 5 years old. And it must be noted that at this time now, there was a power in the West that was developing in what would become the Roman Empire. And you're going to see that in the next verse. Look at this here. Now, in those times, many shall rise against the king of the south. Also, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision. That's the Chazon, but they shall fail, or they shall fall rather. So this is talking about when, of course, Cleopatra was ruling in Egypt at this time here, and we find that Julius Caesar comes to the aid of the king of the south because they had appealed to Rome to help them against the infringements and the cruelty and the enslavement and the wars from the king of the north. And so he comes, and so it says here, now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of this vision. And so at this time, Palestine was taken over by Rome. Remember, Greece fell to Rome, right? So here's something very important to understand. It is at this point that Rome starts to be a player in this drama. It must be remembered in all of this that this fourth line of prophecy in Daniel must repeat the former prophecies and merely enlarge on them. So we've seen it in Daniel 2, we've seen it in Daniel chapter 7. More information came with the little horn, which wasn't in Daniel chapter 2. And so, of course, the 10 toes. And so same thing in Daniel chapter 8, we're given more information. And so here in Daniel chapter 11, much more information. So it says, so the king of the north shall come and build a siege mount and take a fortified city, and the force of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength. And so here is Antiochus Magnus coming to take over the king of the south. But of course, like I say, Rome comes to the aid of the king of the south. And so what happened, of course, is the general, this is Pompilius Linus, came to rescue the Egyptians from Antiochus. And he came and they were trying to take siege of Alexandria. And so when Pompilius Linus came, he told this guy here, Magnus, Antiochus III, he said, listen, you need to pack up and go. And he said to the general, I'll have to consult with the rest of my leaders and I'll let you know tomorrow. You know what he did? And this is recorded in history. He took his sword and he drew a circle around Antiochus III, Antiochus Epiphanes. And he said, right now, before you step out that circle, you need to make up your mind whether you're going to surrender and stop what you're doing and go back to your country, or whether you want to come against the mighty Roman Empire. Well, history tells us that he chose to put his tail between his legs and he went back. So he yielded to the ultimatum of this new power emerging in the West. And of course, that date was in the year 168 BC. And it is the date of the true beginning of the Roman Empire, thus ending the prophetic kingdom of Greece. And so we're going to leave it there because I know I've covered a lot of information. We're going to pick up next week. I'll be talking to you from Bari in Italy. And we will continue with what happens now with the kingdom of Rome, the iron monarchy of Rome, the pagan empire of Rome. Well, let's bow our heads as we close in prayer. Father in heaven, we realize this is a very detailed and complex prophecy, but we see from history that all the details and information that you gave is exactly how it came to be. And from Daniel 2, 7, 8, and through on to Daniel 11, we see the links. We see the links between the world empires. But Lord, help us remember these prophecies are all about Jesus' kingdom. And yes, the devil will use the empires of this world to war against God's people. And this will continue right up until the end of time. But we thank you that Jesus has already won on the cross. Messiah came. He was lifted up for the sins of the people. And Messiah rules in the heavenly sanctuary. I pray a special blessing upon all those who have come to this prayer meeting tonight. Those who will connect later on through WhatsApp and other platforms. Bless us with understanding to realize that these prophecies are coming to a head, that Jesus is coming again soon, the second time, and that we have all this information to know where we stand and how we can prepare for the soon return of Jesus and to avoid the deceptions of the enemy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.